Hey guys, this is Sarah.
Hi, this is Lori.
We are here back recording another episode of Mindful Witchery podcast.
So excited.
Lori and I haven't gotten together for a few weeks now.
I know it's been really weird and I really missed you.
Oh, like I thought I had COVID.
Yep.
Or we had a COVID scare, so I've been quarantining and my husband and I are fine. He might have been exposed at work, but he wasn't, so.
Well, that's fantastic to hear that you were not
I know.
positive, because we know so many right now who were positive and people who are scared of being positive. So it's a really weird time right now, especially all this happening over Halloween and just, all this month of spookiness, and now we're still dealing with COVID. I just kind of assumed that it would all be over with by now.
I know. Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. Like, I'm like, okay, things will settle down. And
now it's freaking Halloween.
And now it's Halloween. And I don't even know. I don't even know what day it is half the time.
Yeah, me too. I'm the same way. I just really don't. I'm having a hard time keeping my days together. Thank goodness for iPhones and calendars and all those things, because otherwise I would have no clue when my kids are going to school. I got one kid going to school full time one week and off the next week. I got one kid going 2 days every week. It's insane.
I can't imagine. Insane. Are they different colors on your?
Yes.
Because I Google, and the only reason why I use it is because I can color coordinate everything.
Exactly.
Everything has a different color. I never read what's in the color, but I know what I'm doing because of the color.
That's
like,
how I know which
class,
kid it is.
Yeah, I don't have kids, but like what class it is, where Carson is.
I know which kid it is because one is one color and one's the other. I'm like,
that's
okay,
awesome.
That's talking about math. Yeah. So it's good, because otherwise I would have no idea what I'm freaking doing every day. Thank goodness it's October though.
Oh, thank goodness.
Thank goodness it's October. It's close to Halloween. It's close to my favorite time of year.
It's the best.
And it's so cool because today we're going to be talking about Samhain.
Yes. And Lori and I laugh because I say it strange because for some reason in my brain I know so you say Samhain, it's either Samhain. I say Samhain. Even though I know that's not right, and I was talking to Lori about this earlier, it's like, I know that's not right. I know a million witches are like, oh, girl, you need to stop, but...
Well, it doesn't roll, Samhain rolls off the tongue better than Samhain.
Samhain.
It really does. I can't say the word W-A-L-R-U-S, so don't feel bad.
W-A-L. What's that spelled?
The animal it's an animal.
Oh, walrus.
Yeah. Mm-mm.
No, it just doesn't work.
I say walrus, and I always have.
Yeah, it's like, you know how to say it, and just my brain, maybe it's part of dyslexia, do you think?
It could be, but I mean, there's a ton of ways to say it. So, I mean, you can say Samhain. Some people say Samhain. Some people say Samhain with a silent M. So there's all kinds of ways because it's Gaelic.
Yeah, Samhain. I said it right earlier. It's Scottish.
Yeah,
Samhain.
So there's all kinds of different ways to say it, because you know how we throw ourselves onto with the English language onto every other language. So we put our own little spin on everything. But yes, so we are going to be talking about Samhain, Samhain today.
Yes. Yeah, and this will be coming out right before it. I think the 31st falls on Saturday this year, so it will be coming out right before.
And it's celebrated from the evening of the 31st to the evening of November 1st. So all of our witchy friends out there are probably getting very excited right now. Yes. This is like Christmas for us. Yes. Or rather, it's like New Year's.
Yeah, for me, it's the New Year's. For many, I guess.
It is, because it started out being a Celtic festival where they passed from the months of light to the months of darkness. It was a harvest time. It was a time when they harvested vegetables. It was the transition into the winter. And the coolest part, I think, is I love it when it's explained as it marks when the veil between the living and the dead is at its thinnest.
Yes.
So
I also read blurred, and I like how where I looked at the research, is like where it's blurred, and I'm like, oh man, that's so awesome.
It's the time to honor and communicate with the dead.
Your ancestors, honor your dead. It's very similar to the Day of the Dead that a lot of like Mexican and Southern American cultures practice. It's like the same thing, but just different.
And there are connections. I mean, if you look at the past, you look at the history of Samhain, There are connections between how we celebrate Halloween. And I was reading about the history, which I thought was really cool, that the Gaelics, the Scottish believed, especially a lot of the people who worked farms, which were most of the people, they believed that the Fae, or the fairies, needed to be appeased this time of year because to preserve crops and animals and make sure that the winter wasn't so rough. So the Fae, or the fairies, were also prone to apparently kidnapping.
Yes.
People.
Fairies aren't the lighthearted, beautiful little pixies that you think of.
Especially the Fae.
Yes, the Fae are not that nice. They're very scary.
So that's why people used to dress up in costume to be able to kind of make their way around the Fae and not be caught by the Fae or recognized by the Fae and be kidnapped. So that's sort of a Halloween thing.
Yeah, and they used to wear, what they had at the time too. So they used to wear a lot of animal skins and stuff to do that, just so they wouldn't be recognized, or dress up also to appease, depending on, I think when it first started, to appease the gods too, so they would have good harvests and have a bountiful, very healthy winter, hopefully.
And all this cool stuff, all this cool traditional stuff, kind of got embraced and overrun by the advent of Christianity.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And
those Protestants again.
Oh, yeah. Gotta lay it on those Protestants.
We gotta at least mention Protestants at least once. Oh, not the Protestants, the Puritans.
Yes,
Sorry,
the Puritans.
Protestants.
Oh, the freaky Puritans.
Oh, that's what I mean. The Puritans. I mean, we have to at least mention the Puritans once in every episode. The tradition kind of stopped when it came to America, and then it kind of very slowly started up again outside of New England, because the Puritans were the most strict when it comes to that kind of stuff. They didn't want anything to do with it. And
it became like Samhain became something where the church celebrated the saints.
Yeah.
So it became a very different reflection of what Samhain originally began as. It was no longer a Gaelic and Celtic and pagan celebration. It became much more of a secular kind of celebration, which
almost in a way to convert people to. I actually wrote down a bit of a timeline about what you just said, so it's a good way to kind of start to learn about the history of it. It's so, like you said, it's originally a Celtic festival, and about 2,000 years ago. So the roots and the origin of what we celebrate now as Halloween started 2,000 years ago, over in Ireland mostly. Like the Celts lived in Ireland, the UK, northern France, and they considered their new year November 1st. So that's kind of why for Halloween, which I'll explain in a little bit, why it's both days, because they would celebrate into the night of the 31st. It was like the eve of Samhain. And they believed that the night before, that veil was thinned the most. Kind of that night, they used to have bonfires.
Well, I read that the Samhain is really a fire festival.
It's probably why it's my favorite. Oh, you guys know me, or you don't know me with fire, but fire is my element.
She loves fire.
I love fire. I use it in every single ritual. I wouldn't know what I would do without it. And it's what I personally do, which we'll talk about later on this holiday.
Fire is cleansing and it's purifying. So it makes sense that Samhain would use fire in its tradition.
Yes. Yeah, and I know too we talk about, especially in our witch episode we just did, all about witchery, that pagans and witches don't usually do sacrifices, but actually back then they weren't human sacrifices, they were animal sacrifices, and that was mostly because they did it on that night to appease the gods. So they would sacrifice a goat. They would eat it though. Yeah. They would make
it wasn't
use
just
of it.
Bloodletting.
Yeah, they would sacrifice it to have a better year for crops, for health, for safety, things like that.
Because this was the time. This was the new year. This was the pagan New Year, and it was meant to be reflection on what had happened in the previous year, letting it go, and moving forward into the next year. So it would make sense that they would do everything that they could to be able to ensure a prosperous new year.
Very much so. And they were so nature-based, too. So their whole existence depended off of the food they grew. And, you know, the sun coming up the next day, and more than we are dependent on it, because most of us don't need to farm. We can just go to the store. But their livelihoods depended on the earth and their whole existence, their medicine, everything. So this was very important.
That brings the Fae back into it as well, because the Fae, just like Sarah said, were not these little fairies that you see on calendars and things like that. The Fae would ruin and destroy crops, according to legend. And so you had to appease them. You had to make sure that they were happy in order to have good crops and have a prosperous new year. It was interesting, though, that they chose that New Year fell right at the transition into the dark months. I think that's interesting.
That is interesting.
Because they had to be very forward-thinking, if you think about it, because in the dark months, you're not going to have productive crops. You're not going to have, your animals are going to be basically still.
Yep.
Keeping warm, making sure that they have food and warmth. And they were forward-thinking enough to think, well, come the warmer months again, we're going to need this to be able to have successful crops. But things, speaking for, farming, it does start. The planting starts. Some of the bulbs, like there are bulbs that start in the wintertime, and having to keep your animals healthy.
Yeah, very
so
much
it does start then. But they were very forward-thinking.
Yeah, they kind of knew what was up.
Oh, yeah.
I think we would have done just fine back then.
I think we would have been fine.
Yeah. Yeah, before
we
they got...
we would have been burned at the stake.
Yeah, probably. So, before the Celts were invaded, we probably would have done just fine. So it was a Celtic festival, and then this is kind of where it gets into when the Christians came. How do you say that in a not negative way?
How do you say it without saying when the Christians
came? I think in most history, when it comes to pagans, and then the Christians came. But it's history
until the Christians came.
And so same thing Lori was saying. So in the 8th century, Pope Gregory III designated November 1st as All Saints' Day. And it started incorporating these Samhain traditions, these pagan traditions, and they began calling the eve before Samhain Hallows Eve. So that's why sometimes you hear Hallows Eve, which eventually developed into Halloween, which we call it today. But some people call it on All Hallows Eve. The Hocus Pocus quote. It's like, on All Hallows Eve, he lit the black flame candle or something why can't I remember? It's something like that. God, I love that movie.
Oh, I love it. It's one of my favorites.
Okay, so here we go. This is where it starts getting... Do you have any more to add?
Well, no, not about the history. I think it's so important, though, to know, the history of and why you're celebrating things. With Samhain, it's one of 8 Sabbats through the circle of the year for witches, and it's one of the most important because it is a transition one, and it's one of the 2 Sabbats where the veil between the living and the dead comes down or is blurred. So it's a really important festival, and one of the aspects of it that I think takes it really far from Halloween, because people kind of mix the two sometimes, is that Samhain is really a very somber festival. It's a very serious festival. It's a time to respect and to memorialize and to pay respects to the dead, to your ancestors,
the people who helped you and taught you and came before you.
And we were talking about some of the things that you can do to celebrate Samhain. And for those of you who already celebrate, I'm sure that you probably already have your traditions that you do. And for those of you, we were just talking about this really, really cool quote. And for those of you who are still in the broom closet,
oh my God, it's so
cool, who aren't really comfortable with, and really being overt about your celebrations for witchery, there are some things that everybody can do to celebrate Samhain in their own way. I thought this was so cool. We were just talking about this. One of the things that people do to celebrate Samhain, I love this. It's called the Dumb Supper.
Oh, and I've never heard of this.
This is so cool, guys. I absolutely love it, and I so want to do it this year. It's when you invite people to your house. People gather at somebody's house. They bring a potluck dish that represents their family. And they also bring pictures and relics from their ancestors. And they make an altar out of everyone's pictures and relics. And when they sit down to have dinner, they set a place and an empty space that represents the dead.
That's so beautiful.
And they have a silent dinner.
That's so beautiful.
I think that's so beautiful. So beautiful.
I love that. We should try that next year.
Yeah.
We should totally try that next year.
And
I'd make my grandmother's Irish soda bread because it's so good. That'd be so cool.
I just think it's so, I think everything about Samhain that I love is that it's so communal. If you want it to be.
If you want it to be.
If you want it to be. It can be solitary. I mean, you can wear, the colors are, red, orange, and brown.
Yep.
For Samhain. If you just feel comfortable wearing your red, orange, and brown on your socks even, and that's how you want to honor Samhain, then that's how you honor Samhain.
Yeah, you could even start, to me a part of it too is we're both big into history and learning the roots behind things, is do some research into your family even. Learn, go get online. There's tons of resources where you can learn about maybe you're related. Yeah. To one of the Salem witches like me.
I found out one of my family members was on the Mayflower.
That's so cool. Yeah, learn some history. Learn, maybe find a new ritual or learn about a different type of witchcraft that night. Or, what Lori and I are going to do for our... Because I usually practice alone. But this year I'm going to do it with Lori is we're going to have a fire. And as I treat it as my new year, every year... I write down everything I wish to release.
And we're going to do it on bay leaves.
And we're going to use it on bay leaves, which I've never done. I'm so excited. We're going to use
markers and we're going to write, we're going to manifest things that we want to let go of.
Yes.
And we're going to burn the bay leaves in the fire.
Yeah. And to bring life and transformation. And it's also, like Lori was saying, it's not all, trick-or-treating and candy, which is great, but...
I love me some Reese's Cups. Don't get me wrong.
Right? I know we can eat Reese's Cups too. But facing our fears is a big one. And I think that's what I'm going to focus on for myself this year is facing the fear of moving forward and finally letting go. I've been kind of waiting for this day to let go of some things and to finally just release.
And really manifest what moving forward is going to look like. Really getting a visual on what it's going to look like. And Samhain is all about reflecting on your past, putting it away, and looking toward the future. That's really what it's about. And I love some of these things that I've just been learning that I really did not know. I think they're so beautiful. Like one of the ways to celebrate Samhain that I thought was really nice was you can do it as a group or solitary, is to take a nature walk.
Yeah.
Because it's all about, it's a time to tie in yourself with nature's rhythms. And it's a great way to ground. We've talked about that before. It's a great way to ground, touching the grass with your bare feet, touching the trees with your hands, putting your hand in the stream, in the water. All of that is reconnecting to what's most important. Yeah. Reconnecting.
Going to a cemetery.
Oh my gosh. Right? I was reading about this woman who that's how she celebrates Samhain. She goes to a cemetery and takes a walk, and she takes flowers with her, and she drops the flowers off on graves where she knows that nobody visits.
I love that. And it's just honoring, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be your ancestors. It's just honoring life and death, and it doesn't have to be morbid. It could be quite beautiful because it's just another natural part of life, and just storytelling too, like carrying on. That was one of the things I wrote down is carrying on stories from your family about people that you love. Tradition. And
you could even write a letter to an ancestor.
Yes. Oh, I love that.
Or the one that I loved was writing a letter to someone, an ancestor, that maybe you didn't have such a great relationship with, and writing a letter of forgiveness.
Yeah. And you maybe never got a chance to...
This is the time to communicate with your ancestors, people who are gone before you. Things that are gonna take on a whole other power, like smudging. Smudging takes on a whole different perspective when you're seeking protection from your spirit guides. And at this time of year, when the veil is lifted, the veil is blurred, there's that much more power involved in smudging.
There's a lot of raw energy, too. Now that you're saying that, too, it's like there's a lot of, especially if your intent is to, transform and get rid of stuff, it's going to feel a little more raw
Sure will.
than it usually does. I know it does for me, so I can't speak for everybody, but I know for me it feels very raw and it feels very personal.
And it is close. It's close. Those ancestors, you're in communication with ancestors and people on the other side more than you would be on any other evening of the year. I mean, it's the veil is lifted. And it's the time to take advantage of that. It's a time to do anything you can to honor, to make connections. It's so important. And that's not to say that you shouldn't celebrate. I mean, it is a somber holiday, but I mean, you can
carve your pumpkins.
Absolutely.
Which isn't actually, I didn't know this. Carving pumpkins is an American thing.
Oh my God. There's so many things that are an American thing that don't exist in other parts of the world.
I always assumed it was part of the tradition, like because you make scary faces and stuff like
that. And it's a gourd.
If you've ever seen the scary gourds, look it up because they're more frightening than pumpkins. But I always thought it was like same thing, like with the bonfires you had to the scary pumpkins to ward off. No, it's American. So it's candy.
Crazy?
It's crazy. And I don't think it started till like the early 1900s, like maybe even 1930s.
I love it though. I love my jack-o'-lanterns.
I know. I don't think I would ever go back. I do want to carve a gourd one year and have it just be frightening because there's when they start kind of like deteriorating and molding, they are the scariest things.
But I mean, you can also if you really want to go out there and you want to really celebrate big and have a joyous occasion, make a meal, make a Samhain meal with things like meat and root vegetables.
What's it called? Especially around now, like a lot of witches get together. Witches' balls.
Witches' balls are really, I don't know if they will be this year because of COVID.
Probably not. I think they canceled the big one. There's a big one here in New England. It's around Salem, maybe. I don't think it's in Salem. But there's a huge one. There's also one, I think, in New Hampshire at a castle. Salem basically are closing their doors.
Yeah, Salem has closed their doors for
year.
Halloween.
So just FYI, do not try to go there.
Everything's
closed.
going
to be closed. And
save yourself the trouble.
Save yourself the trouble.
Closed.
Yeah, try to, I guess that's my suggestion is this year really stay close. Yeah. Maybe this is the time to be more of a solitary witch and
focus and celebrate your ancestors.
Yeah.
Celebrate the dead. Celebrate the dead.
You can eat your candy and
I'm gonna eat my candy.
Right?
I mean, you can even make an altar. Like I actually thought about this year making my altar. You can use skulls. You can use berries. You can use nuts. You can use harvest foods like pumpkins and squash and root veggies. Put out a cup of mulled cider for the dead.
Yeah, because apples are a part of the tradition too, which I don't think was a part of the original Celtic Samhain traditions, but not too long after it became developed, kind of when I think it was the Romans. It was the Romans. I wrote that. This was the part that I wanted to say because the Roman Empire in 43 AD conquered the Celts, which is not good, but they ruled the Celts actually for about 400 years. And during this time, instead of completely abolishing it, because Romans believe in a lot of god and goddesses too, they blended a lot of the traditions, which I actually didn't know a lot of this. And there was a god, I'm going to botch this, Frye, and she represented the passing of the dead. And Pomonia, her symbol was an apple.
Oh, wow.
So that's when apples began kind of like bobbing for apples. Now it became a symbol of how like Halloween, All Hallows Eve, all that. I thought that was interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah.
But everything becomes a little bit more personal on Samhain. I mean, I know if you're into working with tarot, I love working with tarot cards. If you're into working with tarot cards or runes, this is the time to work with them. This is the night of reflection. It is a night where your instincts will be honed. It's a good night to do readings.
I agree. Ooh, one more. I'm really big into history, if you guys didn't know, and I just love learning where things come from. So the other part before we end this that I thought fascinating was our traditions that we hold now in America are not universal. Actually, a lot of other countries don't celebrate Halloween. We're very unique in that way. But the tradition started around the mid half of the 19th century, like 1840s, 1850s, kind of there was the Irish potato famine, and Irish people began to come over here and bring some of their traditions with them. So Samhain traditions, Celtic traditions. And then Americans were like, okay, so they took it, and the spiritualist movement happened. And that's where fortune telling started coming into play. Women used to go and try to figure out things about their husbands, or like, who's going to be my future husband? So the whole spiritualist movement, which we will most definitely have to do an episode on someday, it's one of my favorite topics, helped kind of spark the traditions that we do now. Kids going around, and then in the 1930s, 40s, 50s is when kids started going around trick-or-treating.
And those were the creepiest costumes ever.
They were I was about to say that. Oh my God, guys. Like, look up 1950s Halloween costumes.
Or don't.
If you want to. They're really bad. But that's when people started partying, and there was actually in the 1930s, there was a lot of vandalism. So they cut back on that when the goody-goody 50s began happening. And that's kind of when our traditions really solidify here in America. So you can definitely celebrate. They're actually kind of two separate holidays. I guess.
They are really two separate holidays.
Yeah, they both, are rooted, and one just kind of stayed and one morphed. But that's kind of the cool part about
and that's what happens.
History is things morph to work for people. I don't know.
And you can also, just one other thing that you can do is you could call on the four elements: earth, fire, wind, and air. And that's a good time to manifest the elements during Samhain as well. Everything just takes on kind of a different, more powerful oomph during Samhain. It's influenced by your ancestors more than any other holiday. Yes. So it's it's special. So whether you are in or out of the broom closet, there's all kinds of ways that you can celebrate Samhain. So I hope that we've given you some insight not only on the history, but some things that you can do to celebrate. And I know I'm adding a couple of new traditions this year. I'm always pretty quiet about my celebration and the way that I celebrate Samhain. But this year I'm going to be a little bit overt about things.
Yes, me too.
Yes.
Like, you help give me the confidence to be a little more open. And I'm just excited this year to be doing it with you.
Yes, because me too. This is exciting.
Honestly, I usually go out into the woods by myself. Like,
I think we should go put flowers on tombstones. I think we should just do it all up. Absolutely. I can't wait. Barefooted in the cemetery. So
somebody's going to call the cops on us.
Yeah, that's it.
I love it.
So guys, happy Samhain.
Happy Samhain, guys.
And we hope that you celebrate in the way that makes you feel most comfortable, the way that helps you to move forward in this transition holiday, and just enjoy and connect.
And as always, feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about
Happy
anything.
to answer.
All right.
See you guys.
Bye.